Imagine this scenario. A heavyweight champion of the world is sent to prison. Being a spoiled, rich celebrity, unaccustomed to hearing no, he expects the prisoners to treat him like a god. But things don't go quite as he expected. The story takes place at Sweetwater, a new high-security prison in the Mojave Desert. Local inmates are entertained by brutal boxing matches accompanied by loud rap music. An old, respected prisoner, Mendy Ripstein, a former mob boss, observes the fights and tells his right hand, a young Mexican man known as Chewy, stories about the golden age of boxing. Monroe Hutchen, an undefeated local champion and a hero welcomed by the cheering crowd, is about to face his opponent, an undefeated champion from a different prison. The boxers touch gloves, the bell rings, and the fight begins. Despite his opponent's superior size, Monroe aggressively attacks and easily defeats him in a knockout. Monroe is the winner. Marvin Bonds, a commentator in the brief fight, announces to the inmates that the Iceman is soon coming to this prison. Monroe looks concerned about the news. A former heavyweight boxing champion, George Chambers, known to the general public as the Iceman, is convicted of forcing a woman to have relations with him and is about to be sent to Sweetwater. He gives an interview to the press in which he claims he's innocent, but nevertheless brags that he is not afraid and will adapt to prison life. The interviewer, a professional manipulator, asks provocative questions, so George loses his temper and tries to physically assault him. By the way, guys, the story of this movie is fictional, but it's loosely based on the events of Mike Tyson's incarceration. George is put in a helicopter that flies to the remote prison. He reminisces about his glorious career as an undefeated heavyweight champion, saddened that it is now over. Back in those days, he used to talk down to reporters, boasting about his invincibility. The helicopter is approaching the prison yard. Monroe, concerned about the Iceman, watches the helicopter as it lands. His manager, James Kroisek, known as Ratbag, disregards his concerns and cheers him up, saying he can defeat the Iceman. Prison guards meet George at the helicopter and escort him inside, where he receives standard prison clothing. The warden and the prison management have a talk with George. As a spoiled, rich celebrity, he immediately demands a CD player and some music, as if it's a hotel or something, but the warden quickly explains that music here is a privilege he will only get after 6 months of good behavior. Guards then escort him to his cell, where he meets his new cellmate Mingo. Intimidated by the Iceman, he quickly puts his stuff on the top bunk and says he wants no trouble. Sometime later, Ripstein comes to visit the former champion. George doesn't seem to be particularly impressed by his mob background. Seeing that George has an ego, Ripstein cleverly manipulates him by saying they have a champion who can beat him. This bold statement piques his curiosity, so he asks Shuey who it is, and he reveals that it's Monroe. Later, in the mess hall, Mingo identifies Monroe for George, so he goes to talk to him. He confidently approaches him from behind and asks if he's the champion here. George immediately starts making fun of the guy, implying he's too small to be a heavyweight champion. But Monroe, a humble, soft-spoken man, keeps his cool and doesn't respond aggressively. Seeing this, George slaps him. Guards take them apart, as George continues establishing his dominance by saying, "There's no champion here but me." The warden confronts George about the incident, but in the most bratty, spoiled manner, George threatens to call the press if the warden does anything about it. The management of the prison is frustrated with having a celebrity in the place. Guards later come to Monroe and reluctantly punish him for the altercation they know very well wasn't caused by him. It was an order from upstairs. Fearing a conflict between the Iceman and Monroe, the management intends to keep Monroe in solitary until he can be transferred to another facility. Mingo politely informs George that his attitude is inappropriate. He may be strong, but if other prisoners who already dislike him team up against him, he won't have a chance to survive in prison. Ratbag, frustrated with the way Monroe was treated, makes fun of George in front of other prisoners. George, amused by a skinny geek challenging him, approaches Ratbag and tells him to punch him, but he's reluctant, being afraid that George would hit back. George literally begs Ratbag to punch him, so he reluctantly does it. Everyone laughs and cheers, amused by this. George pretends to be fine with it, but then suddenly hits Ratbag so hard that he flies back into other prisoners as they watch in fear and disgust. He tells Ratbag to tell Monroe again that there is only one champion here. George starts working in the kitchen with Mingo. The management lady, Darlene Early, comes to talk with Monroe in solitary. He is frustrated that he's being punished for an incident he didn't cause, but he's fine with being on his own. Furthermore, Monroe isn't afraid of the Iceman. He sees him for what he really is, a coward who needs other people's approval because he constantly lives in fear inside his own head. George has a meeting with his manager, Yank Lewis. He advises George to behave if he wants to get out sooner. His lawyers also advise him to be a model prisoner and get out on parole because his financial situation is horrible. The woman who was allegedly assaulted by the Iceman, Tony Rollins, gives an interview in which she emotionally describes what happened. The lawyers inform George that she is now filing a $75 million civil lawsuit against him, making his financial situation even worse. Monroe spends his time in solitary building a model with toothpicks. He reminisces about his own short-lived boxing career. Things were going well. He even became the California state heavyweight champion not long before his incarceration 10 years ago. George has a strange conversation with a rather feminine-looking prisoner who tells him he should pay his respect to the man named Saladin, a leader of a black community in this prison. George approaches Saladin and starts a conversation with him. Saladin compliments him on his accomplishments and tries to recruit him into his organization. All of a sudden, George strikes him. Saladin, amazed by his boldness, politely asks him to reconsider. But George starts randomly beating every person in front of him. He eventually goes through them all as they desperately try to stop him. Later, George was caught and put in chains by the correctional officers. The warden reprimands George for his unacceptable behavior, especially considering his situation. Darlene also doesn't understand why he would do this. George tries to explain to them that throughout his entire life, any problem he had, he fixed with his fists. It's his nature. He can't be someone else. Monroe has finished building his model. It's an Asian tower structure associated with Buddhist temples, known as a pagoda. He enjoys looking at the beautiful model he constructed and reminisces about the events that led him to prison. His girlfriend was cheating on him with another man, and he caught them. In his primal rage, he viciously beat him up, taking his life with his bare fists. For that, he received a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole, of which he already did 10 years. Ripstein, driven by the idea to make a lot of money on a possible fight between Monroe and the Iceman, instructs Chewie to set up a meeting with his mob contacts. The security guards are not the problem, they can be paid off. But he asks them a favor, to deal with the warden who opposes the fight. Sometime later, the warden, obviously convinced by the mobsters, reluctantly announces to the head of security, Merker, that he is going on vacation, and if the two men happen to have a fight in his absence, he doesn't want to hear about it, as long as there is no physical evidence that it ever took place. Darlene also takes a vacation in case things go badly. She knows all about the shady schemes Merker is involved in. Merker goes to free Monroe from solitary confinement. He isn't going to be transferred to another prison as they said before, so he will have no choice but to fight the Iceman. George informs Yank Lewis that if he fights, Ripstein's people have agreed to use their connections to get him an early parole. The manager knows Ripstein from his former days in Miami. He advises George to be cautious. The mobster isn't just an innocent old man he appears to be. He also tells George about Monroe's past. He was an undefeated champion in California 10 years ago. Ripstein has a chat with Monroe. There are people outside the prison very interested in the upcoming fight, and if Monroe wins, Ripstein would win $4 million by betting only $200,000 of his money because the odds against Monroe are 20-1. He promises to give Monroe his protection in prison, but Monroe is reluctant to fight just for empty promises. He has an unemployed sister with kids and wants her to get the money. They go back and forth, haggling, and eventually agree that Monroe will get 40% of the profits. George, accompanied by Mingo, has a meeting with Ripstein and Chewie. He wants to know exactly how they will get him out of prison. Otherwise, he won't fight. They assure him that they have a guy on a committee in the Department of Corrections, so it's a done deal. George agrees. Now that all the arrangements are made, both Monroe and the Iceman start training hard for the upcoming fight. As a boxing history enthusiast, Ripstein insists they use 19th century London prize ring rules of boxing, which are quite different from modern ones. So Yank Lewis is upset because George can get seriously hurt in a bare fist fight. Monroe spends his time jogging in the yard as George watches him. Yank Lewis tries to convince Ripstein that gloves would be better than bare fists. In a sudden change of heart, Ripstein agrees to a different kind of gloves because the fight would then be more spectacular. In the shower room, George approaches Monroe and tries to intimidate him again, but Monroe can easily see through his fake smile and tells him straight up he's not afraid of him, and confidently stares at him. Seeing this, George awkwardly walks away. In further interviews, Tony Rollins cries to the reporters that the public hates her for taking their champion away, calling her a gold digger, but she claims the assault really took place. In the mess hall, Merker observes the inmates banging their cups on the tables. It's a signal that they're about to attack George, who is deeply hated by all prison factions by now. Seeing this, Merker sounds the alarm, so the security guards retrieve shields and shotguns to deal with a possible riot. The prisoners rise and start yelling at George. He just calmly observes them as they lose their minds while he finishes his meal. Then he goes as far as to make fun of their yelling that almost sounds musical. It enrages them further, but luckily for George, the armed security guards come inside and start dealing with the rioters. Chaos ensues. Seeing that things go badly, Merker signals his subordinates to shoot the ceiling to cause the fire alarm sprinklers to spray the room. Later, Ripstein is enraged that this last incident caused the warden to cancel the fight. He goes on about how nobody in California knows how to do business, unlike his associates from the East Coast. He asks Chewie to arrange a meeting with the warden personally. In the meeting, the warden tells Ripstein straight up that the fight has been irrevocably canceled, so he shouldn't bother trying to persuade him otherwise. Ripstein tells him a nice story about his old days when he was with Meyer Lansky. There was a casino they opened, and a town mayor, a man of principles who hated gambling, wanted to shut it down. Long story short, they made him an offer he couldn't refuse, but he still refused. So one day his car mysteriously exploded for no reason whatsoever. In the most calm and polite manner, Ripstein tells the warden that he would rather pay him off from the money he's about to make than have his car mysteriously self-explode as well. The day of the fight closes, so both Monroe and George train hard. Ripstein's associates tell Chewie to go behind Ripstein's back and try and convince George to intentionally lose the fight. Chewie is reluctant because Ripstein wants a clean fight, and it's unlikely that the Iceman would agree anyway. Saladin and other faction leaders approach Monroe and offer to put poison in George's food, making him unable to perform properly. Monroe firmly declines the offer, saying he can and will win the fight fairly, so they should just back off and let him win on his own. It's 90 minutes before the fight. Ratbag massages Monroe's back, telling him to concentrate on the idea of winning and cast aside his doubts. Yank Lewis has a similar talk with George. Everything is ready, and Merker gives the guards a signal to start letting the prisoners inside. The inmates cheer and yell, waiting for the legendary fight to start. Mobsters from Las Vegas will attend the fight as well. Marvin Bonds takes a microphone and starts the ceremony. 4 men sing the national anthem, and the rest of the inmates surprisingly honor it by singing along. Meanwhile, Monroe and the Iceman go through some final preparations with their managers. Marvin announces that the fight is on. Monroe comes out, cheered by the crowd. The Iceman follows him and mocks the booing crowd with insulting gestures. Marvin announces the rules. According to London prize ring rules, there are no traditional rounds. Instead, the round ends when a knockout happens, after which the boxer has 60 seconds to get up. If he gets up, the fight continues until the next knockout, and so forth. On top of that, they use a different kind of gloves. Marvin announces the boxers, clearly giving favor to a local champion, Monroe. They confidently pose for the crowd. Ripstein and Chewie, accompanied by the mobsters, closely observe the boxers. Merker rings the bell and the fight begins. They move to the center of the ring, feeling each other out with minor hits. Monroe swings but misses badly, so George delivers a heavy blow to his head. Despite that, Monroe counterattacks, but George still deflects his attack easily and hits back hard again and again. Monroe retreats and baits George to hit him. When he does, Monroe successfully dodges his hit and manages to hit him back hard. Monroe is fast, but the Iceman is much stronger, delivering heavy blows to Monroe again and again. They go back and forth, attacking each other, but eventually the sheer power of George's hits overwhelms Monroe, and he falls down in a knockout, ending the round. The Iceman mocks Monroe while he's on the ground, but Monroe gets up rather fast, getting ready for the next round. Inmates keep insulting George as he walks near the cage, mocking them. He is full of himself after winning the first round. Monroe is concerned, but despite the knockout, he has the determination to win at all costs. The second round begins. The Iceman swings but misses, so Monroe delivers a heavy blow to the head. A fierce exchange follows. The inmates start clapping, entertained by the top-quality boxing they observe. They go back and forth, but after Monroe misses a hit, George starts a series of hits that puts him in a corner, and now George viciously beats him up until Monroe falls. Another knockdown for Monroe. He gets up and observes George insulting the crowd that keeps booing him. Marvin and the crowd are amazed with the tenacity these two fight with each other, wondering how much longer they can go like that. Round 3 begins. The Iceman, confident about his chances, aggressively strikes Monroe multiple times. Monroe counterattacks, but George easily deflects his attack and fights back hard. But Monroe's luck is about to change. George attacks him and misses a hit. Monroe uses the opportunity and delivers a heavy blow to his head. He follows that with a series of hits, putting George in the corner, after which he keeps beating him up until the exhausted George falls down in a knockout. The cheering crowd explodes with enthusiastic ovations, praising Monroe. The Iceman, humiliated by the knockout, immediately starts attacking Monroe once he gets up, but it's against the rules. The next round hasn't started yet, so they take them apart. Round 4 begins. They both deliver a few hits and then clinch. Monroe switches to southpaw and delivers a series of hits, after which they go back and forth hitting each other. After all this exchange, George is getting increasingly weakened. Monroe uses his slow response to deliver a series of devastating blows. Unable to respond, George can't take it much longer and falls down in a knockout, unable to stand up. Monroe is the winner. The crowd cheers, happy about all the money they won by betting on the unlikely outcome. As a moral guy, Monroe is somewhat saddened by the pathetic end of the previously undefeated, overconfident Iceman. He raises his arm in victory, relieved that the painful struggle is over. The crowd is chanting his name. He is now a legend, a true undisputed champion. Chewy later reveals that Ripstein passed away shortly after the fight. He kept his word. Monroe got his money, and the Iceman was released on special parole. Furthermore, he left Chewy $2 million in his will, giving him an opportunity for a new start when he gets out. The Iceman and his manager both denied that the fight ever happened, claiming it was just a rumor. Sometime later, George Chambers has a fight for the title of the heavyweight champion of the world. The prisoners at Sweetwater watch the fight on television. He wins the fight, making him the undisputed champion of the world. The prisoners laugh and joke about this, knowing the truth. They once again chant Monroe's name. Meanwhile, he sits in his cell and builds yet another model with toothpicks, smiling, completely unconcerned about the yelling and chanting downstairs. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.